The third Tuesday of the month was Tea Day. King Oren Blackmane hated Tea Day with a passion that bordered on clinical. It was the day his mate, Gemma, and his mother, Constance, the Dowager Alpha, locked themselves inside the sun-drenched rose solarium for 3 hours of what Gemma serenely called things. Oren had ruled the Blackmane pack for 9 years. He had brokered peace with the mountain clans, personally ended a border skirmish that had raged for a decade, and once stared down a feral rogue alpha until the man sat down and apologized. None of this prepared him for a closed door and the sound of his mother laughing. They are laughing. That is good. Happy mate, happy mother. Go in, sit with them, put head in mate's lap. Oren ground his teeth. The voice was the animal part of his mind, the wolf register that had no filter, no dignity, and no concept of strategic patience. It was also, infuriatingly, the part of him that was always right about what he actually wanted, which was exactly why he ignored it. He'd stationed 2 of his best guards, Rhys and Brennan, near the solarium doors. Their official duty was to ensure the Queen and Dowager were undisturbed. Their real duty was espionage. Their reports were useless. "Laughter, my king," Rhys had reported last month, his face a mask of professional stone. "Just a lot of laughter." What kind of laughter? Oren had pressed, hating himself. Brennan had shifted his weight. "The scary kind, Alpha. The kind where they've definitely just finished talking about you." And then the changes would arrive, subtle as a shifting tide, undeniable as a full moon. First, the cushion. His throne was a formidable seat of granite and petrified ironwood, carved by his great-grandfather, and it had been the symbol of Blackmane authority for 300 years. It was also, though Oren had never admitted this to any living creature, murder on his lower back. One Wednesday morning, he arrived in his chambers to find the throne adorned with a plush, charcoal-gray velvet cushion. It was obscenely comfortable. He sat on it, stood up, removed it, sat down on the bare stone, felt his spine scream in protest, and put the cushion back. He told no one. The cushion stayed. Cushion is good. Back feels better. Mate did this. Mate loves our back. We should bring her something. A rabbit. Do humans like rabbits? They should. Rabbits are excellent. Then his schedule changed. Oren's days were a relentless chain of meetings, decisions, petitions, and disputes, each one bleeding into the next from dawn until long past dark. He'd been doing it this way for 9 years, because his father had done it this way, and his father before him. One Monday, his steward informed him that his afternoon had been restructured to include a mandatory 1-hour block labeled Strategic Reflection. Who authorized this? Oren demanded. His steward, a man who had survived 3 alpha reigns and feared nothing except the Dowager, looked at a fixed point above Oren's left shoulder. "Standing orders, my king." "Whose standing orders?" The steward's gaze did not waver. "Standing orders, my king." Oren spent the first strategic reflection period pacing his office like a caged animal. On the second, he found a book of truly terrible poetry on his desk that he was fairly sure belonged to his mother. By the third, he gave up and went for a run along the river, the cold wind in his fur, the sun on his back, the world reduced to scent and speed and the simple joy of 4 legs moving fast. He came back feeling clear-headed, sharp, and absolutely furious at being so transparently handled. The final straw was the beets. His royal chef, a hulking man named Gregor, who answered to God and possibly Constance, but certainly not to Oren, began sneaking roasted beets into his meals. Oren hated beets. They tasted like sweet, earnest dirt. They were the vegetable equivalent of someone who was very kind and very boring at a party. When he confronted Gregor, the chef simply shrugged, his massive shoulders rising towards his ears. "Healer's orders, my king." "I didn't see the healer." "The queen did. On your behalf. On my, she can't, and the Dowager confirmed, my king. A triple authority, unassailable. He was being outflanked in his own kitchen. She cares about our insides. This is love. Eat the dirt vegetable. It is the taste of being cherished. He was being managed. His mate and his mother, two women whose combined willpower could bend steel, had formed an alliance with the sole purpose of improving his quality of life, against his explicit wishes. Oren Blackmane, Alpha King, whose word was absolute law in all matters of the realm, could not get a steak without beet relish on the side. On the other side of the castle, Gemma Thorne Blackmane was aware that her husband was spiraling. She could tell by the way the guards were walking, too briskly, too purposefully, the specific gait of men who had been given a mission they knew was ridiculous, but were too loyal to refuse. She was in the small workroom she'd claimed off the main corridor, a space that had previously been used to store broken furniture. She'd cleaned it out, organized it, and turned it into a functioning office in 2 days. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody had told her she could. She'd simply done it, because a problem unsolved was a physical itch she couldn't ignore, and the castle had approximately 400 unsolved problems that everyone had been politely stepping around for years. The glimmer moths, for instance. She'd been studying them for weeks. Beautiful creatures, wings like stained glass, bodies like tiny jeweled bullets. But they ate refined silver the way Oren's wolf apparently ate rabbits, enthusiastically and without discrimination. Are you going to sit here cataloging moth damage, or are you going to think about why your mate is currently interrogating the kitchen staff about root vegetables? Gemma closed her eyes briefly. Lyra, her wolf, the animal current that ran beneath every thought, had opinions. Lyra always had opinions. Where Gemma was cautious, measured, and inclined to approach every situation as a logistics problem, Lyra was blunt, confident, and deeply unimpressed with Gemma's tendency to make herself small. He's not angry about the beets. He's angry because he can't figure out where the beets came from, and not knowing things makes him pace. It's not complicated. You're overcomplicating it. I'm not overcomplicating anything, Gemma muttered to the moth specimen she was examining through a hand lens. You reorganized his entire life, and you're surprised he noticed? That's not strategy. That's denial. The thing about Lyra was that she was almost always right, and she delivered her rightness with the energy of someone who had been right for years and was bored of not being listened to. Gemma's wolf didn't growl or snarl or do anything so dramatic. She just stated facts in a tone that made Gemma feel like she was being patiently managed by a version of herself that had never once doubted her own worth. It was deeply annoying. It was also the only reason Gemma had survived the first month of being queen without having a complete breakdown. He's coming this way. I can hear his heartbeat from here. It's doing that angry, confused thing where it speeds up and he doesn't notice. Also, he smells like beets. So Gregor got to him. Good. Don't say good like we planned it, Gemma whispered. We did plan it. You drew a chart. It was a nutritional schedule, not a... The door opened. Oren filled the frame. He was, objectively, an enormous man. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the kind of physical presence that made rooms feel smaller. His amber eyes locked onto her with the intensity of a man who had found the source of all his problems and was going to have a very serious conversation about it. Gemma's heart did a small, involuntary thing. Lyra noticed immediately. There it is. Cardiac event number 47 this month. You're keeping a tally? I'm keeping a tally. We're both aware this is happening. Gemma ignored her wolf and smiled politely. Oren, can I help you? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Beets, he said, as if the word itself were an indictment. Ah, she said, you've spoken to Gregor. Gemma, did you send my chef nutritional instructions on my behalf? Say yes. Say it with your whole chest. You're his queen. You're allowed to care about his iron levels. Your blood work came back with low iron, Gemma said calmly. Beets are high in iron. It seemed like a straightforward solution. My blood work, he repeated. How did you get my blood work? The healer is very responsive to politely worded requests. He stared at her for a long moment. She held his gaze. It was, she had learned, the only way to deal with Oren when he was in full alpha indignation mode. You simply did not blink. He was like a large weather system, impressive, loud, and ultimately unable to sustain itself if you just held still long enough. He's doing the jaw thing. The jaw thing means he knows you're right and he hates it. I love the jaw thing. We are going to talk about this, he said, pointing at her, then at the general concept of beats, then at the castle at large. Tonight, our sitting room. I look forward to it, she said, and meant it in a way that was probably not what he intended to provoke. That evening, he stormed into their private sitting room, the door swinging wide. Gemma was ready for him. She'd changed out of her work clothes, settled into her armchair with a book and a cup of chamomile tea, and arranged herself in a posture of serene unconcern that had taken approximately 15 minutes of deliberate effort. Shoulders down, book angle, casual. Tea, steaming, but not too hot. You want to be able to sip it slowly for dramatic effect. Good. You look like a woman who has never once worried about anything. He's going to hate it. The scent of him arrived before he did. Pine and iron, and something warm underneath, like embers banked low. It hit her the way it always did, a full-body pull that started in her chest and ended in her fingertips. She was getting better at hiding the effect. She was not getting better at not feeling it. Put head in lap. She is reading. She will play with our hair. This is the best thing. Why are we angry? I forgot. The beats, Gemma, he said, his voice a low growl. The cushion. My schedule. What exactly do you and my mother discuss during your tea sessions? She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her gaze steady over the rim. Beautiful. Hold it. Let him watch you not answering. 3, 2, 1. Things, she said. What things? She set the cup down with a delicate click. Your mother and I discussed the household, seasonal provisions, the glimmer moth situation in the West Wing. And me, a faint smile. You are part of the household, my king. That was perfect. He looks like he swallowed a lemon, a whole lemon. You're managing me. It wasn't an accusation. It was the exhausted recognition of a man who has found the walls of his own trap. We are supporting you, she corrected gently. There's a difference. Is there? He stepped closer. The air between them did what it always did, tightened, warmed, became a physical thing with its own intentions. His wolf purred, a deep rumble that started in his chest and that he had to physically clamp down on. Embarrassing. Like his own body was a traitor with better instincts than his brain. He's close. He smells like the forge and pine resin, and that thing underneath that we're not going to name because naming it makes it harder to think clearly. Back up. Don't back up. I don't know. This is your problem. I just live here. When my mother was regent, he said, and his voice was tighter now, harder. She ran this pack for 11 years. She handed the crown to me with a 300-page binder of suggestions and a look that said she expected me to fail. Now you're helping her write volume 2. He hadn't meant to say that much. The words had clawed their way out, and now they hung in the air between them, raw and too honest. Gemma felt the shift, from irritation to something deeper, something with a wound underneath. The beats weren't the problem. They never had been. He's scared, Gemma. He's scared he's not enough. You know this one. You wrote the book on this one. Gemma's smile faded. She looked at him, really looked at him, this enormous, powerful man who could silence a room with a glance, but couldn't sit still when two women closed a door. "Your mother loves you, Oren," she said softly. "She just has a terrible way of showing it." She paused. "And I want you to be able to breathe, that's all." The sincerity in her voice disarmed him completely. It always did. He could handle a challenge. He could handle a fight. He had no defense whatsoever against genuine, quiet care. She is air. Mate is air. Breathe her. This is not complicated. Why are we like this? "Just warn me before you outlaw red meat entirely," he muttered, dropping into the armchair opposite her. "A king needs some vices." She picked up her book, but he caught the real smile this time. Quick, bright, unguarded. "I'll see what I can do. But your mother is very compelling on the subject of arterial plaque." He groaned. He tried Constance next. He found her in the portrait gallery, standing before a painting of his great-uncle Tiberius, a man widely acknowledged to have been an idiot. Constance spent most of her afternoons here, ostensibly appreciating the family history, but actually, Oren suspected, silently ranking her ancestors by competence and finding most of them wanting. She was a handsome woman, silver-streaked dark hair, posture that could cut glass, and a gaze that had once made a visiting alpha from the northern reaches excuse himself to be sick in the corridor. She turned that gaze on him now. "Oren, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you misplace your crown again?" He had misplaced his crown once, 7 years ago. She would never let him forget it. "Mother, I need to talk to you about Gemma." The transformation in her face was immediate and alarming. She smiled. Not the arch, performative expression she deployed in public, but an actual, unguarded, warm smile, and it was one of the most unsettling things he had ever witnessed. "Isn't she wonderful?" Constance said. "The daughter I always wanted. Clever, organized, and her wolf has the most marvelous attitude. Not like some I could mention." She gave him a look. "My attitude is excellent. We only howled at the delivery man twice this month. That is personal growth." "She's capable," Oren conceded carefully. "But the two of you seem to be collaborating," Constance supplied, her eyes bright with militant delight. "Yes, it's been invigorating. Did you know the castle's emergency water supply hasn't been tested in 4 years? Gemma noticed. We had it inspected last week. 3 valves were corroded shut." Oren did not know this. He felt, obscurely, that he should have. "That is a practical matter. It is a matter of you being so busy deciding which shade of gray the new guard cloak should be that the basement is quietly falling apart." She patted his arm. The gesture was simultaneously affectionate and devastating. "You are a good king, Oren. You are also a man who would work himself into an early grave if left unsupervised. She sees the cracks you're too proud to look at." "You were regent for 11 years, he said, and the words came out sharper than he intended. "You ran everything. You stepped aside." Something shifted behind her eyes, a flicker of the woman she'd been, not the imperious dowager, but the 32-year-old widow with a 9-year-old son and a kingdom that expected her to fail. "I did," she said, "and it nearly killed me, if we're being honest, which I see we are." She turned back to the portrait of Tiberius. "I ran this pack because there was no one else, and I was terrified every single day that I would make a mistake that would cost your future. So yes, when a young woman with a mind like a steel trap walks into this family and starts noticing the things I spent 11 years worrying about alone, I am going to have tea with her. Frequently." She looked at him again, and for a moment the arch amusement was gone. "You chose well, Oren. Better than you know. Now stop fighting it and eat your beets." She dismissed him with a wave, turning back to Tiberius. This man married a woman who was allergic to wolves. Allergic to wolves. In a pack of wolves. The sheer audacity of his stupidity haunts me. Oren left the gallery feeling like he'd been disassembled and reassembled with several pieces in new positions. His mother had been afraid. The great Constance Blackmane, the Iron Regent, had been terrified. He had never in 20 years considered this possibility. The next morning, a dispute arrived from the southern border. Two pack families, the Hartfords and the Danes, had been feuding over water rights for the better part of a year, and the local adjudicator had given up trying to mediate. They were brought before Orrin in the great hall, both patriarchs bristling, their wolves so close to the surface that the air in the room smelled like ozone and aggression. Orrin listened. He listened to Hartford's grievance. The stream had shifted course, cutting through land that had been Dane territory for 3 generations. He listened to Dane's counter-grievance. The Hartfords had dammed a tributary upstream, causing the shift. He let them argue for exactly long enough that both men had said the one true thing, hiding underneath their posturing, and then he spoke. Hartford, you dammed the tributary to irrigate your north field after the drought 2 summers ago. It wasn't a question. Hartford's mouth snapped shut. Dane, you knew about the dam and said nothing because the diverted water was filling your well, which had been running low since your grandfather overdrew it in the 60s. Dane went red. Here is what will happen, Orrin said, and his voice carried the particular authority that came not from volume, but from absolute certainty. The dam will be modified, not removed, to allow seasonal flow. Both families will share the tributary access on an alternating schedule that I will have drawn up by the end of the week. Hartford, you will repair the erosion your dam caused on Dane's eastern bank. Dane, you will stop poisoning Hartford's dogs. Yes, I know about the dogs. The healer talks. Any further disputes come directly to me, and I promise you both you will not enjoy the conversation. Both men left looking chastened, slightly impressed, and profoundly uncomfortable. It took Orrin 14 minutes. He'd read the water survey reports months ago, noticed the discrepancy in the tributary flow data, and had been waiting for one of them to be stupid enough to escalate. This was what he was good at, seeing the whole picture, reading people, cutting to the truth when everyone else was still performing their grievances. He was a good king, decisive, observant, fair in a way that occasionally felt like being hit with a very precise hammer. He was also a man who could not figure out what 2 women were doing behind a closed door, and the contrast was beginning to haunt him. He escalated his intelligence operation. This was, he would later admit, a mistake. But he was a king who had been told his entire life that information was power, and the only information he lacked was what happened inside that solarium. He tried bribing the kitchen staff who prepared the tea service. They refused to talk. One of the kitchen maids, a girl of maybe 17, looked at him with such naked pity that he almost promoted her on the spot out of spite. He tried reading the notes Gemma left for the steward, but they were written in a personal shorthand he couldn't decipher, a weaver's notation system she'd learned from her mother. He stared at the symbols for 20 minutes. They could have been household instructions, or a recipe for soup, or a detailed critique of his personality. He would never know. He assigned Reese to follow Gemma discreetly and report her movements. Reese returned within the hour. She noticed in the first corridor, Alpha. She didn't say anything. She just turned around and handed me a list of things she needed from the east storeroom. I spent 2 hours carrying boxes. I think she's using me as labor now. Reese is lost. Mate has captured him. He is hers now. We must accept this. He tried, in his most desperate hour, pressing his ear to the solarium door. He heard his mother say very clearly, "He's outside the door again, isn't he?" A pause. Then Gemma. "He's been there for 4 minutes. His left knee creaks when he leans." Constance, louder now, clearly aimed at the door. "Orrin, if you're going to eavesdrop, at least have the dignity to deny it when confronted." He retreated with the speed and grace of a man who had absolutely not been eavesdropping and would deny it under oath. She knew. They both knew. They always know. We are not good at sneaking. We are large, and we smell like authority. These are not stealth qualities. His beta, a broad-shouldered, perpetually harassed man named Marsh, found him in the corridor, straightening up from a position that was definitely not ear against door. "Alpha, are you all right?" "Fine," Oren said, with a dignity that impressed even himself. "Report." "The Glimmermoth situation has gotten worse. They've eaten the silver leaf off the ballroom mirror frames. Also, 3 sets of antique cutlery. Also, I think they're organizing." "Organizing," Oren repeated flatly. "They seem to have a leader, a big one, iridescent blue. I've named him Gerald." "You've named the moth." "He's earned a name, Alpha. He's eaten more silver than most thieves. I tried the citrus deterrent compound from the apothecary. It stripped the varnish off the ballroom floor. Then I brought in a pair of hawk finches that are supposed to eat moths. They ignored Gerald entirely and ate the fruit from the dowager's private garden instead. She sent me a note." "What did the note say?" "It said, 'If another bird touches my plums, I will ensure you are reassigned to the southern latrine rotation for the remainder of your natural life.'" She signed it with her full title. All of them. Oren looked at his beta, a man who had served the Blackmane pack loyally for 15 years, who had faced down border raiders and rogue wolves without flinching, and who was now being terrorized by both a moth and a 70-year-old woman. "Handle it, Marsh." Marsh looked at him with the expression of a man who had been handling it, was always handling it, and would continue to handle it while the castle slowly dissolved around him. "Yes, Alpha." After Marsh left, Oren sat alone in his study. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, catching the dust motes in gold. He could hear, faintly, the distant sound of laughter from the solarium. 2 women, laughing. About him, probably. About the beats, the cushion, the schedule. About the king, who didn't know how to stop working long enough to notice he was tired. His wolf stirred, not with its usual booming enthusiasm, but with something quieter. Something that felt uncomfortably like honesty. "We are tired, Oren. We have been tired for a long time." She sees it. That's why she put the cushion there. Not because we are weak. Because she looks at us and sees what we won't look at. He shoved the thought away. He was fine. Kings were fine. That was the job. The following Tuesday was not tea day, but Gemma's influence continued to manifest in small, infuriating, undeniable improvements. The mattress on their bed was new, firmer, better for his back. He hadn't ordered it. His evening tea, which he'd always taken plain, now arrived with honey and a sprig of something that made him sleep deeper than he had in years. He didn't ask what it was. He was afraid it was another beet derivative. He also noticed things he hadn't before. The way Gemma moved through the castle, quiet and purposeful, solving problems before anyone knew they existed. A delivery mix-up with the grain stores, corrected before the steward noticed. A leak in the roof above the east corridor, reported and repaired while Oren was in a meeting. She did these things without announcement, without credit, without anyone watching. She just fixed things. He noticed because he was watching her now. Not with suspicion, but with something closer to fascination. Gemma had come from a family of weavers, quiet people who kept their heads down and their hands busy. She told him once, early in their mating, that she'd spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. He thought she was being modest. He was beginning to understand she'd been completely literal. And her wolf, Lyra she called it, though she only mentioned the name when she thought no one was listening, was nothing like what he'd expected. He caught glimpses of it in her unguarded moments. A muttered, "Oh, shut up," directed at no one visible while she was reading a supply manifest. A quick, bitten-off laugh at something only she could hear. One, he walked into their chambers to find her standing in front of the mirror, arms crossed, chin lifted, wearing an expression of such imperious confidence that for a second he thought Constance had broken in. Then she saw him, and the expression vanished. replaced by her usual quiet composure. "What was that?" he asked, genuinely startled. "Nothing," she said, too quickly. A faint blush crept up her neck. "I was just nothing." He was almost certain her wolf had been giving her a pep talk. A very sarcastic pep talk. The contrast between Lyra's apparent swagger and Gemma's careful humility was, he thought, one of the most fascinating things about her. Two registers of the same person, one who believed she belonged and one who was still waiting for proof. The night before tea day, Gemma couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. She often lay awake after Oren had finally fallen asleep. Later, these days, thanks to the valerian root in his evening tea, and listened to the castle settle around her. The stones creaked. The wind found gaps in the ancient windows. Somewhere in the west wing, Gerald was presumably eating something priceless. Oren slept on his side, facing her, one arm thrown out across the gap between them as if reaching for something even in unconsciousness. He looked younger when he slept, the permanent furrow between his brows smoothed out, the tension in his jaw released. He looked like the man he might have been if the crown hadn't landed on him at 19. "You're staring." "I'm not staring, I'm observing." "You're staring. You've been staring for 12 minutes. I've been counting." It's embarrassing for both of us. Gemma looked away from her sleeping mate and up at the ceiling. The wolf part of her mind was restless tonight. Sharp, impatient, radiating the particular energy that meant it thought the rest of her was being stupid about something important. You fixed his schedule. You fixed his diet. You fixed the water valves and the grain delivery and the leak in the east corridor and approximately 40 other things nobody asked you to fix. Do you know what you haven't fixed? I don't want to have this conversation. The part where you tell him any of this matters to you. The part where you admit you're not doing this because you're efficient. You're doing it because... I said I don't want to have this conversation. Because you love him, Gemma. You love this ridiculous, stubborn, beat-hating man, and you are so terrified of him knowing that, you've turned it into a logistics project. You have turned love into a spreadsheet. I would be impressed if it weren't so pathetic. Gemma pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes firmly. Lyra was wrong. This was strategic. This was useful. This was what she was good at. You're good at a lot of things. Being honest about what you want isn't one of them. Yet. She fell asleep eventually, Oren's arm still reaching across the gap, his fingers almost, but not quite, touching her shoulder. Tea day came around again. Third Tuesday. The solarium door closed. The laughter began. Oren lasted 11 minutes before he was pacing outside like a dog, waiting for its owner to come out of a shop. This time, though, something was different. As he passed the solarium door for the 4th time, he heard his name. Not loud, not aimed at him, but spoken softly, inside the room. He stopped. He should not have stopped. A king should have more self-respect than to stand with his ear tilted toward a crack in a doorframe. But the part of him that had no filter, no dignity, and no concept of strategic patience, the part that was always right about what he actually wanted, held him in place. Constance was speaking. And the guard rotation. Honestly, Gemma, the man has been sleeping 4 hours a night for months. I can see it in his face. His father did the same thing, and look where it got him. I've adjusted the evening tea, Gemma said, and her voice was careful, measured. He's sleeping 6 hours now, at least. But I can't... She paused. The pause was heavy. Can't what? Constance prompted, gently. When Gemma spoke again, her voice was smaller. Not quiet, she was always quiet. Small, like she was folding herself down. I can't do more than he lets me, Constance. And I don't... Another pause. Oren's chest tightened. I don't know how long I get to do even this much, before he decides it's too much, before he decides I'm overstepping, before he what, dear? The longest silence yet. Then, barely a whisper, before he realizes he doesn't actually need me, that everything I do someone else could do, and then I'm just the weaver's daughter who got lucky. The words hit Orrin like a physical blow. He actually stepped back from the door. "Oh, Gemma," Constance said, and her voice held none of its usual sharpness. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 11 years proving herself to people who had expected her to fail. The voice of someone who recognized the wound because she carried the scar. "My dear girl, you are the least replaceable person in this castle, and I include myself in that assessment. You have to say that. I'm your daughter-in-law. I have never in my life said anything I had to. Ask anyone. Ask Orrin. Ask Tiberius's ghost." A wet, shaky laugh from Gemma. Then silence. Not empty, but full. The silence of someone being held, or holding themselves very still so they wouldn't break. Orrin stood in the corridor, motionless, the words reverberating through him. "Before he realizes he doesn't actually need me." She thought she was temporary. She thought her usefulness was a lease, and the moment it expired, she would be returned to the margins. Every fixed leak, every adjusted schedule, every beat-laced meal. It wasn't management. It wasn't a power play. It was a woman building a case for her own existence, brick by careful brick, terrified that the foundation was borrowed. And he, with his grumbling about cushions and his wounded pride about beats, he had been confirming her worst fear. Every time he pushed back against her care, she heard, "You are overstepping. You are too much. You are not needed here." His wolf was silent. For once, the voice that always had an opinion, always had a suggestion, always had a plan involving hair sniffing or rabbit gifting, was quiet. And in that quiet, Orrin heard the simplest truth his wolf had ever offered him, not in words, but in feeling. She is not managing you. She is holding on. He walked away from the door, slowly, silently, not because he'd been caught, but because he'd heard something he could not unhear, and he needed to figure out what to do with it. He did not figure it out gracefully. He spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted uselessness, signing documents without reading them, staring out windows, and inadvertently terrifying a junior guardsman by making eye contact for too long while thinking about something else entirely. The guardsman later told Marsh he was certain the Alpha was planning to exile him. Marsh told the guardsman the Alpha was just having feelings, which was somehow worse. "Everyone can tell we are having feelings. Our face is doing a thing. We should stop doing the thing. We don't know how to stop doing the thing." He went to the scent archive. It was a sacred place in the castle, a circular, high-ceilinged room where the shelves held not books, but thousands of small, sealed glass vials. Each contained a piece of cloth or leather holding the scent of a pack member, living and dead. It was a living history. He came here when he needed to think, standing before the vial that held his father's scent, old leather, iron, and the sharp bite of winter wind. His father had been a great king. Everyone said so. What no one said, because no one had been close enough to see, was that his father had also been an exhausted, lonely man who'd worked himself to death at 47 because he believed asking for help was a weakness. Orrin had inherited many things from his father. He was beginning to suspect this belief was the worst of them. He looked at the shelf below his father's vial. A small silver plaque read, "Gemma Thorne Blackmane." The space was empty. Her scent hadn't been formally archived yet. The ceremony was a personal one, done when a new pack member felt truly, irrevocably home. She hadn't done it yet. She wasn't sure she was staying. The realization landed on him like a dropped anvil. His wolf, who had been respectfully quiet during the father's vile portion of the visit, broke the silence with the subtlety of a thrown brick. "You idiot! She fixed your back, your sleep, your diet, your water supply, and your muth problem, and she still thinks she might get sent home? What exactly does a woman have to do in this castle to feel wanted? Slay a dragon? There are no dragons. We ate them. This is a problem we caused." He found her in the herb garden behind the castle. It was late afternoon, the sun going copper, and she was on her knees in the dirt, sorting bundles of a tough, reedy grass. She looked up at his approach, and immediately he saw it. The flicker, the quick assessment. Is he angry? What has he found out? What do I need to fix? He hated that flicker. He hated that he'd put it there. "What's that?" he asked, nodding at the grass. His voice came out rougher than intended. "Sorrow thread," she said, her composure settling back into place like a mask. "It grows on the upper slopes. Moths can't stand it. I'm making sachets for the west wing." "For Gerald," he said. She blinked. "For the moth. Marsh named him." The laugh that escaped her was genuine, a quick, bright sound she immediately tried to swallow. He wanted to hear it again. He wanted to hear it every day for the rest of his life. Now. Say it now. She is right there. We are right here. The words exist. Open mouth. Use words. Do not bring up rabbits. Definitely do not bring up rabbits. "Gemma," he said, and the way he said it made her go very still. He sat down on the stone bench beside the herb bed. He was aware that this was not a kingly posture. Alpha king of the Blackmane pack, sitting in a garden while his mate knelt in the dirt with moth repellent. He did not care. "I owe you an apology," he said. Her stillness deepened. "For what?" "For making you think you have to earn your place here." The words were hard and clumsy in his mouth, stones he had to push out one at a time. "For every time I complained about the cushion, or the beats, or the schedule. You weren't overstepping, you were—" He stopped, started again. "My father worked himself to death. I've been doing the same thing and calling it strength. You saw that, before anyone else. And instead of thanking you, I made you feel like you were the problem." Gemma stared at him. She was holding a bundle of sorrow thread so tightly her knuckles were white. "Oren," she said carefully, "how much of the tea conversation did you hear?" His silence was answer enough. The change in her face was instantaneous. The composure cracked. Not dramatically, she didn't cry, didn't shout. But her expression went open and raw in a way he'd never seen, a way she'd clearly never intended him to see. She looked caught, exposed, stripped of the careful armor she wore every day. Inside her, Lyra said nothing. For the first time in Gemma's memory, her wolf was silent. Not sarcastic, not confident, not pushing her to stand taller, just silent. As if even Lyra didn't have a protocol for being this seen. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she said, and her voice was very flat. I was being honest," he finished. "You were being honest. With my mother. Because you couldn't be honest with me. Because I made it unsafe." She looked away, her jaw tight. He could see the war in her, the part of her that was all swagger and certainty, that already knew she deserved to be here, fighting against the weaver's daughter who had spent 20 years learning that the safest place in any room was the corner no one was looking at. "I don't know how to do this without being useful," she said finally, and the admission cost her. He could see it in the way she held herself, braced as if against a blow. "It's the only currency I know, Oren. If I'm not fixing something, then I'm just here. And just being here has never been enough. Not for anyone." The quiet after her words was enormous. A bird sang in the garden, oblivious. "Tell her, not with words. Words are where we are stupid. Sit with her. Be here. Show her what here means. For once, Oren listened to his wolf. He didn't make a speech. He didn't argue or reassure or try to logic his way through her pain. He slid off the bench and sat on the ground beside her. In the dirt, in the herb garden, the king of the Blackmane pack with soil on his trousers. He picked up a bundle of sorrow thread and turned it over in his hands, clumsy and unpracticed. "Show me how to tie these," he said. She looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "What?" "The sachets, for the moths. Show me how." She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it. Her wolf, the confident, sarcastic, unimpressed part of her that knew exactly what she was worth, surfaced for just a moment. He could see it in the way her chin lifted, the way one corner of her mouth twitched. "You'll be terrible at it," she said. "Almost certainly. Your knots will be awful. I expect nothing less." She handed him a length of twine. Their fingers brushed. He felt the touch everywhere. The wolf part of him, the animal current that ran beneath every thought, leaned into the contact like a flame bending toward air. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. She showed him how to tie the sachets. He was, as predicted, terrible at it. His massive hands were built for swords and reins, not for delicate work with dried grass and string. She corrected his technique 3 times, her voice shifting from careful neutrality to something warmer, something that almost had a laugh underneath it. "No, you're crushing the stems. Gently. Think of it as... If you say, like holding something fragile, I want you to know I've held fragile things before. I held the crown of succession at my coronation without dropping it. You held it with both hands and your mother was standing behind you with her arms out. That is royal protocol, not incompetence." He's funny. He doesn't know he's funny. That's what makes it work. Also, his hands are enormous, and he's trying to tie a knot in a blade of grass, and it's the most endearing thing I've ever seen. Don't tell him I said that. By the 5th sachet, she was openly smirking. By the 7th, she'd stopped correcting him and started just watching, her chin propped on her hand. "That one looks like it was tied by a bear," she said. "A very determined bear. With no thumbs. I have thumbs. They're just decorative, apparently." He held up his latest attempt. It was lopsided, overstuffed, and leaking sorrow thread from one corner. She reached over to fix it, her hands closing over his to adjust the twine. The contact was sudden, warm, and neither of them had planned it. Her fingers were small against his, quick and sure where his were clumsy. She tightened the knot, and in the process, her thumb traced across the inside of his wrist. They both went very still. The garden was quiet. The light was gold. His pulse was hammering directly under her thumb, and she could feel it. And he knew she could feel it. And every nerve in his body was leaning toward her like iron toward a lodestone. His wolf was vibrating at a frequency he couldn't suppress, a low hum that wanted to close the distance, press his face into her hair, breathe her in until the world made sense. She pulled her hands back first, not fast, deliberately, like someone setting something down that they very much wanted to keep holding. Her cheeks were flushed. She picked up a fresh bundle of sorrow thread and focused on it with the concentration of a woman diffusing a bomb. That was something. That was definitely something. I don't know what we should do. I have no protocol for this. I'm usually the one with a plan. I don't have a plan. His wrist was very warm. That's not relevant. That's completely relevant. Shut up, Gemma. For once, Gemma and Lyra were in complete agreement. Neither of them knew what to do with what had just happened. She laughed, not at the sachets this time, at the absurdity of her own situation. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that made her lean back and close her eyes. And sitting there in the dirt, with his terrible sachets and her real laugh and the evening light going gold around them, Oren understood something with the bone-deep certainty his wolf had been trying to give him for months. He didn't need to be managed, and she didn't need to manage him. They just needed to be in the same place, at the same time, with no agenda and no armor. The cushion and the beats and the schedule, they were the only language she had for love, and his resistance to them was the only language he had for fear. Home. This is home. This is the thing the whole time. Don't mess it up. Don't talk about beats. The cushion stays, he said. She looked at him sideways. Obviously. The beets stay. You're coming around on the beets? They taste like sweet, earnest dirt, and I will eat them every day if it means you stop thinking you're temporary. Her breath caught. The smirk faded into something unguarded and vast. She looked at him, her gray eyes bright and serious, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. I'm not good at being seen, Oren, she said quietly. Every time someone really looked at me before you, it was because I'd made a mistake. Being noticed meant being corrected, so I learned to be useful enough that people looked at what I'd done instead of at me. And now she gestured at him, at the dirt on his trousers, at the mangled sachets, at the whole impossible fact of him sitting on the ground in an herb garden. You're looking at me, not at what I've done, just at me. And I don't know what you see. Somewhere deep inside her, Lyra stirred back to life, quietly for once, almost gently. He sees you, you ridiculous woman. He's sitting in dirt for you. Kings don't sit in dirt. This one does. Stop asking what he sees and look at what he's doing. He was quiet for a moment, then, someone I want to eat terrible dirt vegetables for, which is, I think, the strongest declaration of affection I'm capable of making. We just voluntarily committed to beets. Forever. This is the most heroic thing we have ever done. More heroic than the border skirmish. The border skirmish did not involve root vegetables. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. I spent 9 years trying to be my father, he said, and his voice was rougher now, stripped of performance. Sitting in his chair, making decisions the way he would have made them, working the hours he worked. I thought if I could just do it exactly right, I'd stop feeling like a fraud. I never stopped. And then you put a cushion on the chair, and it was the first time anyone suggested that maybe the chair didn't have to hurt, that it wasn't supposed to. He looked down at the sachet in his hands. I don't know how to be a good king, and also a person who admits the chair hurts. You make me think I might not have to choose. She held his gaze, then she leaned over, very deliberately, and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. The contact was small, tentative, a question, not a statement. He turned his head and rested his cheek against her hair. Wild heather and storm ozone. The scent of home. They sat there in the garden until the stars came out, surrounded by badly tied moth sachets, and said nothing at all. The third Tuesday of the following month, tea day arrived as it always did. Oren did not pace outside the solarium. He did not station guards. He did not attempt espionage. Instead, he walked to the kitchens where Gregor was engaged in a pitched battle with a soufflé and requested a tray. 3 cups, Oren said. Her chamomile, my mother's Darjeeling, and whatever I drink, something strong. Gregor looked at him with the long, suffering expression of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. He produced a tray that had clearly been prepared in advance. 3 cups, 2 teapots, a small plate of beet and goat cheese tartlets. How long have you had that ready? Oren asked. 6 weeks, my king. 6 weeks. Gregor knew before we did. Everyone knew before we did. We are the last to know everything. This is fine. This is who we are. He carried the tray to the solarium. He knocked. Constance opened the door, one eyebrow raised to its maximum height, an expression that contained multitudes. "Oren, we are discussing things." "I know," he said. "I brought the tea." Over his mother's shoulder, he saw Gemma. She was sitting in her usual chair, a stack of papers on the table beside her. Household reports, moth damage assessments, a hand-drawn map of the castle's water system. She looked up at him, and the expression on her face was not surprise. It was something quieter, something that had been waiting. Constance looked at the tray, then at her son, then at Gemma. Something calculated itself behind her eyes. 11 years of political instinct compressing into a single glance. "Fine," she said, stepping aside. "But you sit in the small chair, and you don't interrupt when I'm talking about the plumbing." "I wouldn't dream of it." He set the tray down. He poured their tea, chamomile for Gemma, Darjeeling for Constance. He sat in the small chair, which was indeed small, and put him slightly below eye level with both women. It was, he suspected, not an accident of furniture arrangement. He picked up a tartlet. The beet was sweet and earthy, the goat cheese sharp and bright. It was actually genuinely good. He hated that it was good. He would eat a dozen. "So," he said, looking from his mother to his mate, both of whom were watching him with identical expressions of satisfaction. "What things are we discussing?" Gemma and Constance exchanged a look. It lasted about half a second and contained more information than most diplomatic cables. "He's here. He's actually here. He brought tea. He's sitting in the small chair. He looks ridiculous in the small chair. His knees are up near his chest. I love it. I love him. Don't say that out loud. Not yet. But soon. Soon, Gemma." "The glimmer moth situation," Gemma said, her voice steady, the only sign of the earthquake happening inside her being a faint brightness in her eyes. "The sachets are working in the West Wing, but Gerald has relocated to the library. He's eaten the silver clasps off 3 first-edition folios." "Gerald needs to be stopped," Constance said firmly. "I've drawn up a containment plan." "My mother has drawn up a containment plan for a moth," Oren said. "A moth who has caused more property damage than the border skirmish of '93, Constance replied without missing a beat. "He is an enemy of the realm and will be treated accordingly." Gemma slid a piece of paper across the table to him. It was a map of the library with Gerald's known movement patterns plotted in red ink and proposed sorrow thread placement marked in green. It was meticulous, thorough, and quietly brilliant. He looked at it. He looked at her. She was watching him with a careful expression, still half expecting him to bristle, to push back, to retreat into the safety of doing everything himself. He picked up a quill from the table and circled a spot she'd missed, a small alcove behind the reference section where he used to hide from his tutors as a boy. "He'll go here," he said. "There's a silver candelabra in the alcove. It was my grandmother's. If Gerald eats it, my mother will declare war." Constance leaned forward. "I will not declare war on a moth. I will simply ensure it never knows peace." A knock at the solarium door. Marcia's voice, strained and apologetic. "Alpha? My queen? Dowager? I'm terribly sorry to interrupt things, but Gerald has breached the music room. He's eaten the silver pegs out of the ceremonial lute. The one your great-grandmother played at her wedding, Dowager." The silence that followed was nuclear. Constance set her teacup down with a click that sounded like a rifle being cocked. "Which lute?" "The Ashwood lute, Dowager." Constance looked at Gemma. Gemma looked at Constance. Another half-second exchange, an entire military strategy communicated through eyebrow position alone. "Marsh," Gemma called through the door, her voice calm and precise. "Bring me 6 sorrow thread sachets from the herb store, the ones I tied, not the ones the Alpha tied. Also a glass jar, a piece of silver wire, and the lavender oil from the healer's supply." "We're building a trap," Constance said, a glint of something approaching joy in her eyes. "A moth trap. For Gerald specifically. A targeted, humane, highly engineered moth trap, Gemma corrected. He'll be relocated to the West Garden, where the silver leaf willows will keep him occupied. Oren looked between them. You're giving the moth a retirement home. We're giving the moth a strategic reassignment, Constance said. There's a difference. Gemma's mouth twitched. She added the alcove to her map and began sketching the trap design in the margin. Their fingers brushed as she took the quill back. The touch was small, ordinary, two people passing a pen across a table, unremarkable to anyone watching. Oren's wolf registered it with its usual lack of subtlety. Mate's hand. Warm. Good. Everything is good. We are in the room. We were always supposed to be in the room. Why did it take so long? Doesn't matter. We are here now. Yes, Oren thought. We are. Constance was already pivoting into a theory about Gerald's dietary preferences that was either brilliant or completely insane, while Gemma was simultaneously sketching the moth trap and taking notes on the library's humidity levels and their effect on the binding glue of the older volumes. The two of them operated like a single, terrifyingly efficient organism. Oren listened. He contributed when he could. He knew the castle better than anyone, knew the hidden spaces and forgotten corners, the places where problems liked to breed. And when he couldn't, he simply sat and let the work flow around him. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't failure. It was the thing his father had never learned, that a kingdom held by one pair of hands would eventually slip through them. He was an alpha king who ate beets and sat on cushions and let two women plan his moth defenses. He was also the best king the Blackmane pack had had in 3 generations, and he was finally starting to believe it. Not because he did everything himself, but because he was smart enough to sit in the small chair. The small chair is uncomfortable, but we are in the room. The room is everything. The small chair is a good trade. Gemma caught his eye across the table. She didn't smile, not with her mouth, but her eyes held something warm and certain that hadn't been there before. The look of a woman who was, maybe for the first time, beginning to believe she was home. We're home. Say it. You can say it now. The room is warm and the tea is cold, and he's sitting in the ridiculous small chair, and he's staying. He's staying, Gemma. He held her gaze. He let her see what he rarely let anyone see. Not the king, not the alpha, not the man trying to live up to a dead man's shadow. Just Oren. Tired, stubborn, grateful. His. Hers. Constance interrupted the moment with the precision of a woman who had survived 30 years of pack politics by never letting sentiment go unchecked. If you two are going to make eyes at each other, do it after we've finished the moth strategy. Gerald waits for no one. Gemma looked away first, a blush climbing her neck, but the smile she was fighting won. Oren cleared his throat and turned back to the map, feeling lighter than he had in years. Outside, the sun filled the solarium with gold. Inside, the tea grew cold, the tartlets disappeared, and the king of the Blackmane pack learned, slowly and imperfectly, and surrounded by moth containment plans, what it meant to share the weight of a crown.